Hello, everyone. My name is Linnea Anderson. I am the archivist of the Social Welfare History Archives. On behalf of the First Fridays Committee and the Archives and Special Collections Department, welcome to First Fridays Online. Today's presentation will also be posted later on the University of Minnesota Library's YouTube channel, so you should be able to access it within the next few weeks. First Fridays is a monthly series of presentations made possible by a generous gift from Governor Elmer L. Anderson and Mrs. Eleanor Anderson in honor of former Library Director Dr. Edward B. Stanford. The presentations are based on materials in the University of Minnesota Library's archives and special collections. A special thank you to Alan and Jason from Middle English Interpreting, who will be providing ASL interpretation for today's presentation. If you have any questions for our speaker today, please submit them using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Please use Q&A and not the chat function so that we can keep track of your questions. You can submit your questions at any time, but we will hold them until the end of the presentation as time allows. We will now pause for a land acknowledgement. The University of Minnesota Twin Cities is built within the traditional homelands of the Dakota people. It is important to acknowledge the peoples on whose land we live, learn, and work as we seek to improve and strengthen our relations with our tribal nations. We also acknowledge that words are not enough. We must ensure that our institution provides support, resources, and programs that increase aspects to all aspects of higher education for our American Indian students, staff, faculty, and community members. Our presentation today is by Darren Terpstra, Archives and Special Collections Design and Project Specialist, and Lois Hendrickson, Curator of the Wangensteen Historical Library of Biology and Medicine. Exhibits allow the University of Minnesota libraries to share their collections and engage communities. Lois and Darren will share ideas on how to mount a successful exhibition with emphasis on opportunities to meet the challenges of online exhibits. We will now start with Darren.
Hi, I'm Darren Terpstra. Oh, well, wait a minute. No, that's not me. That's Pippi Longstocking. Hold on a minute. All right. Hi, I'm Darren. Oh, good heavens. Everybody wants to get in on this, apparently. Hi, I'm Darren Terpstra, and I work here at the University of Minnesota Library's Archives and Special Collections as an exhibit designer. And I'm going to chat with you a little bit starting out here. And some of the material that I'm going to use comes from Erin Cole, who is a history museum professional and a PhD in history. And some of her work and some of my work overlap. So that will be kind of a nice way to bring some of that together. You know, oftentimes people ask me what I do for work. And I say, I design, fabricate, and install exhibits. And then they say, what? Like, what's that? I don't get it. So I thought maybe it'd be good to kind of start from the beginning and look at some ideas of exhibits. So I am going to transition here into sharing my screen and get a PowerPoint started. So I'm going to do this. Oh, host disabled. Participant screen sharing. Let me see if we can figure this out. There we go. This might help. Okay. And there we go. We're in business, everyone. So what is an exhibit? An exhibit is basically a public display. It's a work or a number of art items or works of art or items of interest in an art gallery, museum, or at a trade fair. An exhibit can range in content from something relatively simple and entertaining to something much more complex, highly captioned, and very educational. An exhibit is essentially a three-dimensional narrative environment. So it's a story or an argument that you can move through physically and interact with. How do you create an exhibit? So that starts with the message and the material. Kind of like a thesis statement is for a research paper. You know, after a brief introduction of your topic, you state your point of view on that topic, and oftentimes in one simple sentence. And this sentence is the thesis statement, and it serves as kind of a summary of the argument or the information that you're preparing to share. And that's kind of where we need to start with exhibits. A key part of my job is to work with the curators to determine what message they want our patrons to understand as a result of their visit, and thinking about the audience and what they might want to experience when visiting the exhibits that we're creating. One important question for me to get at, in order to get at that central idea or theme, is to ask, why do I care? And that often is met with like, why do you ask that question? Well, it's easy to care about something that you're passionate about, but what about everyone else? And why are people going to want to come to this exhibit, especially when there's so many different things you can do in town? You can go to a Vikings game, you can go to the Mall of America, you can go for a nice walk. Why are you going to get in your car, drive across town, park, find the building, get into this space? You know, we need to ask those questions to determine that so that we can help find a relevant perspective to share about this information and help encourage people to come out to the exhibit and sort of pique their interest. And also engaging different types of visitors is easier if there's sort of one big central idea that ties the whole exhibit together. And that's sort of the same with the artwork and the design, is to have one central theme running through the whole exhibit for continuity and the ability to drive that one point home, that one big idea home. Now, that can be a difficult task, especially because most curators have untold amounts of material to draw from. So to whittle that down to the most pertinent, succinct, and interesting materials to tell that story can really be overwhelming. So you definitely need to be good at editing things and paring things down a bit. This kind of focus, however, is essential for our visitors, and it makes the exhibits more visitor friendly and definitely better for our guests. So speaking of guests, who are these exhibits for? Well, they're for everyone. They're for you. We make exhibits for our visitors, not necessarily for professors or historians or PhD folks, or even our archivist peers. We want the exhibit to reach a very general audience, and we need to know how to engage them as much as possible. But it doesn't matter a person's educational level, their age, race, gender, socioeconomic status, or where they live. It's our goal to reach out with these materials from the archives and special collections and help to engage people with those materials. And they're really open for everyone. So you don't have to have an idea that these exhibits are super heady or overly educational necessarily, because they're a really great outreach to everyone. But again, that comes back to us to help really make that information direct and succinct and interesting to our visitors. All right, so then we need to start building the exhibit. Once we have that central theme or that big idea, and we have a general idea of perhaps who our audience is going to be, as in if we're going to present something from maybe our children's archive collection and it's about comic books, well, we know there's a definite demographic that comic books and comic illustration can appeal to. So those are people we might want to work toward advertising and marketing toward. Anyway, yeah, once we sort of have those things figured out, we need to begin to build around that the elements that are going to comprise the exhibit. And that would be things like the exhibit copy and the didactics that people are going to read. It's also going to be things like multimedia presentations. You know, is there going to be a video show or some sort of a slide reel? It's definitely going to be artifacts. It's going to be papers, things of that nature. It's certainly going to be books from the collection, and it's also going to be ephemeral items, buttons, t-shirts, brochures, things of that nature that are all going to be part of the exhibit. Certainly, we look at including interactive places where maybe people can jot down notes or write their thoughts about the exhibit, and then other guests and visitors can read those thoughts and interact with what people are saying. It might also be the physical space arrangement. It's going to be lighting. It's going to be atmospheric things like sound. And it's also going to be perhaps little vignettes, creating little scenes that help the materials that we've pulled come to life and sort of give an atmosphere for all of these things to live in. And that creates a lot more interest for our visitor and a lot more engagement. And it also gives visitors with different learning styles a way to key into information whatever best suits them and is the most meaningful to them. Now, here's going to be a good place to stop for just a minute and mention that when we build these exhibits, and even when we do online exhibits, which Lois is going to be talking a lot more about, we use and employ student workers. And that's a really important component to what we do here, because we are an educational institution and we're here because of students. And so it is really great to give students the opportunity to participate in these kinds of larger projects and have something for their resume and have something to talk to employers about what they've done in the past. And our students are a key factor. In fact, sometimes if something's mounted a little crooked or something has just a small flaw or anything like that in it, I tend to leave it. And if people ask, I say, well, that's because these things are being made by people who are developing their skills. They're being made by students. And that's part of our mission here. And I'm super glad that we have that opportunity. So our students are very important here. All right, now moving on. We're going to kind of talk just a little bit about laying out the space. You know, I said this was like a narrative environment. You know, whoever our visitors are, they're going to sort of go and do whatever they want to do. You really have to earn their attention. And sadly, a lot of exhibits these days don't necessarily always do that. But we definitely strive to engage our patrons. But unlike a book, you know, that has a very definitive way of disseminating information. You know, there's a cover, there's table of contents, there's units, there's chapters. You know, everybody follows sort of the layout. You don't just open a book and go 3/4 of the way through and start reading, right? But when it comes to an exhibit space, sometimes people do that. They might walk in, and even if you put signage up or you number things, they might see something really interesting off in the distance and go straight for that. And they'll miss everything in the beginning or maybe come back around. So the thing is, we need to be somewhat in tune visually and anticipate when people come in, what might they see first? What might they be most interested in? How do we focus our lighting? How do we arrange the cases and the materials to create a flow that will sort of guide our visitors through this exhibit? All of this done hopefully in a sensible and logical way, that will provide an easy flow for guests to absorb and take in this information. So you may not always think about these things when you attend an exhibit, but maybe next time when you do, just take a look at the environment and the space that you're in three-dimensionally and how you move through it. There's a lot of people who probably put a lot of thought in how that's happening. So there's no real wrong way to see an exhibit. But again, if visitors aren't interacting with what we made, then it's probably our fault. We need to ask ourselves, is the subject matter relevant to today's viewer somehow? Are we meeting the viewer's needs as far as setting up the context of the exhibit? Are we creating enough dialogue and a conversational dialogue that informs visitors about what they're seeing? All this is important. And of course, are we focusing on that one main idea to get that across to our visitors and engaging as many learning styles as we can? So yeah, there's no real wrong way to see one, but definitely there's some wrong ways to build and create them, which we have learned over many, many years working in this capacity. Then, of course, there's simply the notion that exhibits can only do so much, right? We're probably never going to have the space, the time, or the budget to create an exhaustive exhibit on any one given subject. But hopefully, we can inspire curiosity, new points of view, give context about certain issues and situations, especially historically, and give people a meaningful experience. And of course, an exhibit can just be one part of the museum or gallery experience, because now we're starting to add supplemental programs such as lectures and openings and books and social media, all to build around that experience. And again, Lois is going to talk a little bit about more of that coming up. And so that is obviously important to us, is to let our materials speak for themselves, but to give it, again, enough context that everybody can understand that main theme. But what happens when you can't be here? What happens, especially in the advent of COVID-19 and our inability to provide that in-person experience? And for those people who might want to revisit the information they saw in a physical exhibits, we are now relying on things more digitally, just like the rest of the world, and doing more online exhibits, which is awesome for getting that content of our holdings out there to people from all over the world. And now here to talk more about what this means and what this has meant to a curator, we are going to join up with Lois Hendrickson, and she is the curator at the Wangensteen Historical Medical Library.
Well, good morning. I guess it's afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Darren, for that wonderful presentation. I'm the curator at the Wangensteen Historical Library. My name is Lois Hendrickson, and I'm going to talk a little bit today about what has happened in our space. So we are not in the same building that Darren does his magnificent work in. We have a separate exhibit space across the river in the Health Sciences Complex. So I'm going to look at how we've been using that space here in the Wangensteen. So pre-pandemic, the Wangensteen Historical Library curated one major physical exhibit per year in parallel with the university academic calendar. The Wangensteen Library is a rare book collection whose scope is health and biology from 1420 to 1930. Because of the collection's focus, our exhibits use health as a lens in which to engage various themes. Here, we looked at medical themes in popular culture using the PBS series Downton Abbey as a basis for this examination. So our exhibit themes are strategically and intentionally chosen to engage various audiences. And Darren talked a little bit about this when he talked about comic books, for example. Downton Abbey in our case, was selected as a way to introduce the Wangensteen collection to the general public in 2014 and was wildly successful. To give some context to exhibits in the Wangensteen Library, I'm going to spend a few minutes looking at our exhibit process and some of the elements that go into the creation of this exhibit and the people involved. Well, this exhibit started with an idea. How could we connect popular culture and rare books, and how could we use Downton Abbey as a lens to showcase some of the Wangensteen's 72,000 volumes and 8,000 artifacts? We're also really interested in exploring how an exhibit could be more than books under glass, that atmosphere that Darren talked about. And an eternal question for most cultural heritage institutions is, how could we mount a successful exhibit with a limited budget and staff? One of the ways we have also done this, as Darren shared, is with the assistance of student interns and volunteers. Well, ultimately, it's up to the curator to share their deep knowledge and to decide on the exhibit themes and pair those materials from the collection. It usually involves a lot of material, as Darren said. In our case, because we're a rare book library, we might start with 200 books that we have to whittle down to 30 or so to fill the exhibit cases and match our theme. In this Downton Abbey exhibit, we had several interns. One of them assisted with graphic design. You can see her color palette here and how that played out in this poster. She also coordinated posters, case titles, and labels. Another student cataloged all of the health events and characters in the Downton Abbey show. Others helped with case design, fabrication, and installation of the exhibit. Because we are fortunate to have an 8,000 item artifact collection, we can creatively combine these with the rare books in our collection and create that atmosphere that Darren talked about. Installing the artifacts and books together attracts audiences to the cases and invites them how to consider how these books provide context for the objects in our collection. Here's a section of our exhibit gallery. You'll notice that our graphic design student created some wallpaper for the backs of the cases and also created case titles. So these wayfinding devices, these case titles, are an important element in our exhibit. Visitors are drawn to parts of the exhibit, and as Darren said, they don't always navigate chronologically from left to right. So having the case titles helps them understand what theme they might see in a particular case and anticipate what they might want to understand. When Downton Abbey became a movie in 2019, we took all of those infographics and some of the books and some of the images and created an online exhibit. And you can just see a portion of it here. If you want to see any of these exhibits, the links are at the bottoms of the slides. Another exhibit we had in the Wangensteen, Visualizing the Body, celebrated the 500th anniversary of Vesalius, who's the father of modern anatomy. This exhibit drew on the Wangensteen's renowned collection of anatomical illustrations and used themes such as how are bodies acquired, what's an anatomy theater, and what are three-dimensional anatomical models. The target audience for us in this exhibit was our medical school and anatomy program visitors. This exhibit increased our collaboration and partnership with these two groups going forward. As Darren mentioned, we're also expanding what we do around exhibits with programming. And in this particular exhibit, we held a semester-long graduate seminar who used materials from the exhibit and a day-long symposium that speakers joined to talk about various parts of their research in relation to the exhibit. And pre-pandemic, of course, we incorporated some interactive exhibit experiences. Here you can see students looking at a reproduction of a 15th century anatomy that we blew up and put together. Students were invited to play Operation, which is a battery operated game where players use tweezers to take out funny bone elements, Charlie horses, Adam apples, and we created an opportunity to use an iPad with a timeline of anatomical discoveries. You know, many people visit exhibits with their friends, relatives, and others, so the social nature of exhibits was important to us and highly valued. This was our first experiment in creating a digital exhibit element. It's not an online exhibit, it was just an element in the exhibit. This timeline was created by an honors student who applied for and received funding from the Undergraduate Research Opportunities Program. She used this open software system called Timeline.js and its Google spreadsheet template, which creates customized interactive timelines of chronological events. This is kind of a lightweight tool, and a lot of beginners use it for interactive media technology. And Timeline says that to date, this tool has been used by more than 250,000 people. Well, a physical exhibit like Downton Abbey or Visualizing the Body can offer engaging and informative experiences for people who visit in person, and they can be immersed in this sensory environment and the storytelling. Physical exhibits can also inspire an online component. And online exhibits allow people to find exhibits that interest them from really any location. They offer unprecedented access to the Wangensteen treasures for this global audience. They might also whet somebody's appetite to come visit the Wangensteen and see these materials in person. We have many students and interns who work with us on exhibits. They learn digital skills, exhibit software programs, how to create a historical narrative, select, feature, and justify materials, and they build a strong portfolio that can advance their career. In turn, the Wangensteen curators bring their knowledge of the collection, match it with student skills and interest to advance the work of the Wangensteen, and they invest their time, expertise, and knowledge to create meaningful experiences for students. There are 3 popular exhibit platforms for online exhibits. In the Wangensteen, we use this third one, Arcgis Story Maps, which offers a variety of tools to create strong narratives and give a sense of place and relationships. One of the reasons we selected this is because it's so widely used here at the University of Minnesota. USpatial, the program that provides and supports this software, supports over 2,000 researchers across 150 departments and centers at the university. All Wangensteen staff, employees, and interns take an introductory course in this software. This exhibit, Underwater, explored humans, health, and science in a watery space. And this exhibit was to focus on the biology part of the Wangensteen Historical Library. In this particular exhibit, we created some curriculum in conjunction with the College of Biological Sciences. Their first and second year students were invited to come to the exhibit. And then they were asked to do an assignment using this exhibit as context, where they compared a contemporary article about water and the environment with a historical primary resource from the collection. While this happened in person, you can see that with our pivot to online, hybrid, and remote education during COVID, that creating an online exhibit of Underwater would allow us to continue to integrate into the curriculum in these biology courses. This software, Arcgis, is always being enhanced. And so we are always changing how we do this. In this exhibit, we really started to use navigational tools. These are story elements that connect readers to links or main sections of the online exhibit story. Our physical case titles, which we talked about previously, became the basis for this table of contents, and it allowed readers to go directly to different parts of the story. Much as Darren said, you don't have to navigate this exhibit from beginning to end in an online environment. You can jump to pieces of the table of content that give you a visual indication of what you might see. Secret Lives of Books was the last exhibit in the Wangensteen space pre-COVID. In this exhibit, we told the story of the Wangensteen Library, Who were its donors? What materials do we have? How have researchers used collection materials in books, articles, and works of art? And in this online exhibit, for the first time, we interviewed some of these users and incorporated video elements into our online exhibit. We also worked with a graphic design student who created, using catalog record information, created these data visualizations, which you can see parts of here. So data visualizations are something that uses computerized tools and expertise to develop and plan and apply data science and visual communication skills. The charts and figures explain really complex topics with visuals as a way to share data. In the physical exhibit, these posters were 3 by 10 foot long and created with the help of Darren's large format printer. They were also incorporated into our online exhibit. Data visualization was a centerpiece of this particular exhibit. And in this visualization that we see, you can see how information in one book in the collection could be communicated graphically by using visual elements like charts, graphs, and maps, and provided an accessible way for viewers online and physically to see and understand trends, outliers, and patterns in the data presented in this book. We use data visualizations in our exhibits in support of the emerging work of the University of Minnesota Libraries to support students and faculty who are increasingly using these data methodologies and technologies in their research, engagement, and teaching. In addition to physical exhibits in the Wangensteen space, we frequently collaborate with other cultural heritage institutions to curate exhibits or parts of exhibits in their spaces. Dangerous Remedies focused on medical treatments using plants that are considered poisonous. It was part of the Bell Museum's inaugural exhibit, Wicked Plants. In this online exhibit, we tied this smaller Wangensteen exhibit to the Bell exhibit using elements from both of our exhibits. Up to this point, we've talked about exhibits that had a physical component that served as the basis for an online exhibit. But we also have student interns in the Wangensteen Library who are creating online exhibits that are developed as part of a semester-long research project. Here you can see Louisa, and her exhibit won a U-Spatial Mapping Prize for provocative and innovative story mapping. This exhibit that Louisa created uses materia medica, which are pharmaceutical plant images, and she combined this with a 17th century French handwritten manuscript to try to map out the origin of how dried plants that were used for medical treatments came to this apothecary in Toulouse, France. She concentrated on a subset, a few pages in this manuscript, but by making her project available online, other scholars can discover this manuscript and potentially add to the understanding about it or use it in other research. In 2020, 2 interns began examining a subset of our 16th century printed books to discover reader marks, which are also known as Marginalia. In addition to creating an online exhibit, their work formed the basis of a project to add the information they discovered to a database, which our rare book cataloger can use to create additional information about these books in the catalog. That's called the Retrospective Bibliographic Record Enhancement Pilot, sort of library language for that work. You can see in this exhibit that these 2 students have an introduction. They explain what Marginalia is, different kinds, handwritten. We saw some drawings of Marginalia. Here's a sample of the spreadsheet that they used, created in part with our rare book catalogers' assistance. Then they told us what they were going to do in the rest of the exhibit. focusing on some interesting discoveries they made. These students read Latin and Greek, so they were able to dive into some of these books and ended up thinking about, what does disease look like? How is it talked about in Marginalia? This summer, the Wangensteen is moving to a new location in the Phillips Wangensteen building. So as Darren was talking about, we are thinking about potential future directions. You can see in the lower right that our exhibit space looks very different from what we had in the Wangensteen. It's in a really public hallway, so a large audience of people will have access to this exhibit. We're thinking about potential partners. How can we collaborate with people on exhibits? What would exhibit themes be? As Darren mentioned, what resonates with the public today? What will this look like in a post-COVID environment? What should we explore? And of course, how can we continue to implement more programming around our exhibits and outreach, whether that's an online exhibit, social media, or pop-up exhibits next to our space? Thank you.
Thank you, Lois and Darren. And we have time for questions. So if anyone in the audience would like to ask a question of either Lois or Darren, please put that into the Q&A feature on your Zoom screen. And we'll keep our eye out for that. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you have about exhibits and about the Wangensteen or about Darren's work that he does. We have one comment so far, which is, that was fabulous. Thank you to our audience for that. We agree. If anyone has any questions, we'd love to hear from you. We'll keep things open for a minute or so here to give folks a chance to type. I'm also going to check the chat while we're at it, just in case. Terrific. All right, it looks, oh, here we go. Oh, we have a question here. Someone is asking, what are the majors of your student workers? So what disciplines are the students who work for us studying? What are they majoring in? Lois or Darren, does one of you want to take that?
Sure. So Louisa, who did the apothecary, started with us as a music major. She came, this program that she is in is for freshmen, high achieving freshmen. And they're paired with faculty and librarians to help in research projects or help them start that research project in their first year at the university. So she came to us and told us she was a music major. But it turns out she was bilingual and could read French. So we started her on this French apothecary manuscript. Louisa just graduated, and we spoke with her in the fall, and she was no longer a music major. The research experience can really transform students. You know, they come, like a lot of students, to the university thinking that they want to major in something. And by the end, Louisa had asked us to write her a letter of reference for law school. So she had changed directions, but the skills that she learned in doing this research project, you know, how to find patterns, how to really dig in and find research, will serve her well in the future.
Yeah, it's probably no surprise. The students that I end up getting or working with have some sort of perhaps graphic design or design background, theater, scenic design, something like that, especially students who are interested in doing, you know, physical work. We actually do the painting, we do the gluing and the mounting and the hanging and climbing ladders and focusing lights. So definitely that has an appeal to a certain group of folks. But yeah, and the students I've had have gone on to work in a lot of different fields, ad agencies. Some of them have gone on to be musicians or done theater work. So yeah, it's been a great group of students. I want to call them kids, but students that we have.
And for our data visualizations and our graphic design, we've been working with interns in CDES, the College of Design. And one of their focuses is, of course, the kind of work that Darren does, but another track that students can take is this sort of data visualization track, working with data to create infographics and other kinds of charts.
Thank you. We have plenty of questions rolling in now. This is terrific. Thanks, everyone. So our next question is, do you save visitor feedback after the exhibit is dismantled, either comment books or digitally?
Yes, we do. Typically, those go into the hands of the curators when we're done. Like on one of those slides I used, you saw those little Postit notes that people wrote. So someone will type all of those notes into some sort of a document, and we will preserve that so that it can accompany information on this exhibit or just information in that particular collection. So yes, we do. And oftentimes, if we do have an online exhibit that's created as a result of that exhibit, then some of that information also makes it into there.
Great. And then our next question, oh, I'm sorry, Lois, did you have an answer for that as well? Okay. Our next question is for Darren. It says, Darren, what has been your favorite exhibit that you've created?
It's funny. I do get that one a lot. And I don't know. Certainly, I have come from the theater and entertainment background. And to marry that sort of entertainment with education is a cool concept, edutainment, if you will, just because it really piques people's interest. Anyway, so some of the exhibits that are favorites of mine are the ones that have been a little more theatrical in nature. So like the ABCs of it, the ABCs of children's literature, where we had lots of little vignettes and lots of scenic elements. And of course, kids and adults love that. And let's see, also, there was an Andrea Davis Pinkney exhibit that we did where we created, it featured one of her books called The Stand-In of the group of African-American youth who refused to leave the Woolworths counter. And we tried to recreate that scene with an actual counter and stools and things that you would find on the counter. But instead of a menu, when you opened it up, it was like a bibliography of all the books that Andrea had written and or her husband had done illustrations in. And so there was a lot of cool ways that you can add interesting texture and information in a discovery sort of way that is very pleasing to people to find in and through the exhibit. So those are a couple of favorites, but boy, I don't know. I really get into all of them. So that's a hard one.
All right, here's another question that is, how long will online exhibits stay available online?
I don't think we have any plans to sunset any of them that I'm aware of. As more people are doing them, I think we're working to gather them in one place so that you can see what's available. Right now, of course, the Wangensteen Library exhibits, you can go to the Wangensteen Library's homepage, and there's a list of all the exhibits and links there. And those links are also on the slides that I created today. So when the slides are available, you'll be able to see those as well.
Yeah, and also on the Ask homepage, the Archives and Special Collections homepage, there should be a link to online and digital exhibits as well. And that's a lot more easier to find than it used to be and a lot more discoverable too.
Terrific. There's even some more questions now. This is wonderful. Thank you. So the next question is, are there any written material that relates to the webinar that you presented today?
Let me see. I wonder if there's like a couple of little brochures and things that are floating around out there that Erin has done. I wonder can we put something in the notes, or I can always send somebody information. I don't have it readily available though.
And what I'll do is I'll respond to that questioner and get their email and then share that with you, Darren. So
Thanks, Linnea.
So our next question is, are there any tools or software that you find particularly useful for creating online exhibitions?
I think that's a good Lois.
Well, I know that that Ask uses Omeka software. But as I said, we've really transitioned to this Arcgis system, which has a plugin unit called Story Maps, which is supported by the university. And we know that more and more faculty are asking students to use this software in their classes. So not only does it provide a good online platform for us, but it gives students skills that they're going to be using in right now a lot of liberal arts classes as well.
So here's a budget question, always of great interest to us who work in the libraries. So what is your budget for the annual medical exhibit? So it sounds like this one is directed to Lois.
My colleague Emily likes to say that we're running an artisanal workshop in the Wangensteen Library. So we create most of the things ourselves. We spend a lot of time at the reuse center at the university looking at what they have on site at any given moment. And I know, Darren, you've gone there for things as well. We scavenge, we borrow things from people. It's usually $100. It's a very small amount.
Yes, we're very good at stretching everyone's tax dollars. So be aware of that. And we have partnerships with like the Guthrie Theater and other folks who store their archives here that help us out with props and different things like that, so that we don't have to store it and we don't have to build it or spend, that kind of money on using those things. So it really does help, but we're very frugal. There's a lot of reuse, there's a lot of upcycling, and I'm pretty proud that we're able to do what we can do on a shoestring budget.
That's not to say there's not a human, a staff and labor cost, right?
Right.
So many of our interns that work with us are working with us as, part of the freshman undergraduate research opportunities program. So the College of Liberal Arts funds a lot of internship and research opportunities for students and pays them some stipends to work with us as well.
So here's another question for Lois. And a comment as well. Love the online exhibits, and someone would like to know when the library is moving to the new building. So when is Wangensteen moving?
We are moving this summer. The movers will come in June, and we will probably open when school opens. Of course, that's all COVID dependent, right?
And here's a question. Someone else interested in following our online exhibits is asking, going forward, will all exhibits be available online?
Well, we would love that. And we're constantly thinking about how to make that happen. But we do run a large program with a very few amount of people. And so a curator is often dealing with their entire unit and supervising students, as well as all the patrons, of course, that come to use the materials. So their daily schedule is really packed. And as well as myself coordinating multiple exhibits in multiple spaces, as well as visual events, different things like that. So our resources are stretched really thin. And in order to do an online exhibit, certainly the verbal content has been written, but the nice thing about being at an exhibit is you're there physically, you get to look at the materials, and we just need to pull those from the caverns and put them into the cases or where they're going to be displayed. But in order to create that digitally, we have to photograph or scan all of those items. And that can take a great deal of time. And then they need to be sometimes cut out or processed in Photoshop, Illustrator, or some sort of creative program. And then you start building it into these programs to be able to put it online. So when it comes down to it, it's a great idea, and it's definitely easier said than done. As we get more resources allocated to the archives and special collections, we're trying to do more of this, but to get every exhibit online, I just don't know when that's going to happen. Hopefully soon, but probably not right away.
Okay, our next question sounds like it's probably for Darren. How long does planning and design take?
Well, I really, well, for large scale exhibits like you might find at the Weissman or the Historical Society or something, that can be year or years in the making. I like to have at least 6 to 8 months ahead of time. Oftentimes the curators themselves have been sort of pondering this and they have ideas already in their head about how they might want to approach things. But by the time I get involved and we start really hammering away at our theme, at the topic, subject matter, and how it's visually going to look, I usually do like 6 to 8 months to prepare all of the graphics and the art direction, and of course the production. We need to print everything, we need to cut it, we need to glue it, paint it, mount it, whatever might be involved just to get things hanging up in the galleries to create that live experience.
Yeah, Darren's right. I have probably a 20-page document with exhibit ideas. And I'm constantly adding like, oh, here's some angle that I might want to use around this, or here's some information somebody else is thinking about with regard to my idea. But it also depends a little bit about what's happening out there in the world. Here we are post-pandemic, thinking about an exhibit that might have sounded great 2 years ago, maybe doesn't resonate anymore, or it's just too much for people. So we have to have some ability to pivot as well.
And the next question is, what are your academic backgrounds?
I'm a librarian with a history undergraduate.
And my undergraduate degree is in visual communications and design.
Someone is asking, where will this webinar be found online and when do you estimate? And I can answer that one. It will be on the University of Minnesota Library's YouTube channel, and it usually takes a few weeks to process the video and get it loaded into the YouTube channel. And I'll reply to you privately with an email where you can check in, and I can send you an alert when it's ready. So our next question is: do you focus group, any of your concepts before building a full exhibit?
You know, we have an exhibits committee, and oftentimes what we will do is draw a group of people together. So it's maybe not an official focus group, but it is a way for us oftentimes to kind of suss out issues or anticipate how materials or ideas might be perceived, and certainly to understand if we've missed something. One thing it's probably worth saying is we definitely do exhibits based out of the materials that we have in our collections, and not always our collections complete. So there can be holes here and there, but we really try to focus on using our collections, again, to make them available for people so people really understand all that we have here to offer as research materials. But yeah, we sort of do our internal focus group to vet different issues as we're preparing exhibits. I don't know if Lois has more on that.
Yeah, well, I most recently ran, before COVID, a charrette, which is what architects use when they're kind of thinking about the beginning of a design for a site or a remodeling of a building. And so because we're running into this new exhibit situation, completely different type of atmosphere, large amounts of people walking by, we ran several different focus groups, and then we had a large group activity where we asked faculty and champions of the library and students to come to the Wangensteen and help us answer kind of 4 questions about what could exhibits look like in the new space, and what kind of vision should we be trying to aim towards in this new space?
Great, and we have just enough time for our one last comment and our one last question. And presenters, you have time to just give a quick answer for these, or the question. So the comment is, wouldn't it be cool to be able to have 3D online exhibits? And the final question is, do you anticipate a pandemic exhibit, pandemic themed, and when?
We do anticipate putting some 3D images into an exhibit we're creating. We had some photogrammetry. We have these acupuncture models, and so photogrammetry is 3D imaging of artifacts. So we anticipate putting that into an exhibit. Will we do a pandemic exhibit? That is definitely on our mind. Are people weary of the pandemic, or do they want to dig into thinking about the pandemic? So our exhibits, when we return, will have elements around the pandemic in them, in the Wangensteen.
Yeah, that's actually a good idea. That would probably be a good idea to have all of the collections. It is really fun when all of the collecting units work together to create an exhibit, because then you get such an interesting range of materials and voices. So who knows, maybe we'll have to get just a little bit further on the other side of it before we really crack that one open. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that will be a topic coming up.
Thanks so much for all the terrific questions, everyone. We really appreciate it. So I hope you will join us again on April 2nd for a presentation from the Couts Family YMCA Archives and the Social Welfare History Archives called Disrupting the Narrative, Documenting and Advancing Institutional Change Through the Archives. And the presentation is going to explore stories of the evolution of racial narratives in the social services and events in the past when those narratives were challenged. What is the role of archivists as caretakers of these documents, and what role can historical documents play in disrupting the narrative? And remember, check the library's YouTube channel in a few weeks for a recording of today's presentation. Thank you, and we'll see you next month.